So what I'm going to do as a plan for this session is I want to give them as much time as I can. So I'm going to lay out a few baseline principles that would feed into the discussions that follow. I'm simply going to get you to think about whether AI is a general purpose technology. So don't be thrown off by maybe a new term, general purpose technology. Sometimes if you put words together, they come up with a very different meaning, and I'll tell you what it means. And I'll also tell you why it is relevant for our lives today, right? And then we can have a conversation with the panelists about whether there is what we are hearing about AI is simply hype, or there is something really, truly remarkable underlying these technologies itself. Yeah? So, of course, all of us have been skimming through a bunch of press articles, and everybody says that AI is the next big thing, right? And we are used to hearing these kinds of statements. And it only turns out that this may not be true, right? I'm not talking about AI, but generally anything that is hyped eventually dies away. And if you think about most technological advances, they are simply a technological advance. Eventually they end up fading away. But general purpose technologies are not like that. They have the ability to make a remarkable difference across a range of sectors, right? So much so that it eventually leads to better standards of living for all of us across the world, right? This was true at least of only two technologies if you go back over the last 130 years or so. One is the invention of the dynamo, electricity. The second one is information and communication technologies. So people are saying that AI could eventually be something like these two. And here is some evidence of it. Even if you forget everything, let's park the standards of living in the side, and we simply look at where are innovations happening. It turns out that a lot of innovations today that are happening seems to be in the field of AI. And if you simply use the patent data as a crude proxy for innovations, it just seems like close to about 30% of all innovations generated today tend to be related to the AI domain. And that is significant, right? And this was what was true of ICT. If you simply stare at the right-hand side of the picture, you would see what happened with information and communication technologies. Remember, that was the other general purpose technology, especially in the recent past, right? And if you look at what happened between, let's say, 1980 and 2000, the formative years of ICT, if you would like, the patterns seem very similar, right? But then, of late, there's been a lot of pessimism as well, right? Larry Summers, some of you might have heard about him. There's a lot of pessimism. He has expressed a lot of pessimism with AI being a general purpose technology. There is now conversations of the productivity paradox. The idea of productivity paradox is somebody says that this is a general purpose technology, but we don't see it in productivity data. And you might ask, why is productivity data the holy grail? So why should we, as normal human beings, care about productivity? Remember, I spoke about standards of living, a crude proxy for productivity improvements, and improvements in standard of living, it comes from productivity, which is why productivity is everything. So Paul Krugman, for example, would say that productivity is everything, right? I'm not going to go to that extent, but productivity is important, a crude measure for our standards of living, the ability, in our case, the ability of AI to increase our respective standards of living. And this is not the first time the idea of productivity paradox has been brought up in the context of a general purpose technology. So when computers came in, right, so Bob Solow, another Nobel economist, said that, oh, you know what, we see computers everywhere except in productivity data, right? So similar pessimism has been expressed about AI as well. So here are at least two. Remember, productivity paradox. There's an article from MIT, Eric Brynjolfsson et al. They talk about is productivity paradox in AI is simply an artifact of expectations or statistics. And then, of course, in the popular press, so this is on the right-hand side of your picture of the slide, you see the hype, right? It talks about maybe our favorite, generative AI. Is generative AI a hype? Forget about AI being a hype. Generative AI, maybe the most popular of all AI tools. Is that even a hype? And the picture that caught my attention is this Gartner hype cycle. So they tried to fit in some of what is going on in the generative AI world in Gartner's hype cycle. So there's a lot of pessimism that is creeping in as well. And the third one, this is the favorite of the economists. The economists just don't see it in the productivity data. And how do we know it? So I want you to first turn your attention to the right side of the slide. If you just look at the right side of the right-hand side of the slide, you see that there was this period of spurt in productivity. And if you look at, so what I've done over here is interspersed electricity and IT, the other two general purpose technologies. You see this spurt in productivity somewhere in the middle of the graph on the right-hand side of your picture, right? And compare that with what we've seen over the last, let's say, 20 years. And assuming that this was like maybe circa 2010 to 20 was the golden period of AI, you see a relatively flat line. And I don't want you to compare countries over here because all countries have been normalized to 1 in 2017. So I don't want you to compare these lines, but look at the movement within the line, right? Except, of course, India, and some of you can tell me what's going on here in our neck of the woods. But if you look at the other three, which is of China, UK, US, all of these are straight lines. So there is no apparent evidence of productivity increases as well. Like Bob Solow would have said, oh, we see AI everywhere except in productivity data. Yeah? So, but let's step back for a bit. So how does technology increase productivity? And how does a general purpose technology increase productivity? There are probably two preconditions. First, it has to be a general purpose technology. What does that mean? It has to be broadly applicable to a bunch of sectors, right? And if you think about it, that's fairly intuitive, right? And this was true of ICT, Dynamo, whatever else. It has to be something that is broadly applicable sectors. And the second one is probably less intuitive, relatively speaking, which is the industry, firms, and the users would have to create complementary innovations to be able to generate value from those technologies. Let's go back to the Dynamo. The big transformation that Dynamo brought around to productivity, which resulted in improvement in standards of living, was simply the idea of relocating machines according to the Dynamo. Previously, the production plants used to be organized in very different ways. This complementary innovation eventually enabled Dynamo to diffuse to all parts of the economy and more people to use it. Right? Maybe in colloquial terms, we tend to call this as the killer apps. And killer apps need not be apps like the ones that we use on our cell phones. It could be these innovations, these complementary innovations that eventually figures out that big use for the technology and diffuses that general purpose technology all across the economy. Right? So there are these two preconditions. And what I want to quickly do, and not take too much of your time, is simply to examine these two hypotheses itself. Why is there pessimism? And one theme could be that maybe AI itself is not a broadly applicable general purpose technology. And I'm going to compare that with ICT, the information and communication technologies. And maybe the second hypothesis is maybe these killer apps or complementary innovations are not happening fast enough, which maybe is the source of this productivity paradox, the so-called productivity paradox that everybody is speaking about. So let me first examine the first one. The first one, so long and short, right? I don't want you to get carried away by numbers and pictures, but the long and short of this slide is I examine the ability of AI to generate further innovations. Let's say I use AI, I'm in healthcare, can I come up with a healthcare innovation? So the ability of AI to spur innovations in other sectors. And there are different ways of measuring it, and I'm measuring it in terms of number of citations a patent gets, just like we write papers, right? A crude way of thinking about forward citations, it's equivalent to the number of reposts that happen on LinkedIn, right? That's the way to think about it. Who's using your messages? Who's using your patents? And the one thing that comes out of this picture is that the blue line, which is AI, is always ahead of the orange line, which is every other sector. AI patents tend to be utilized across a variety of domains, more so than any other innovation. That's the way to think about it. Much like the ICT innovations between 1980 and 2005, the formative years of ICT itself, 1980 and 2000, right? Same thing, it tends to be more original as well. What do I mean by original? It does not tend to build on existing knowledge as much as the other domains, right? They tend to be very original, very much like ICT once again, right? And its applications, if you just look at, where are these patents being used, they tend to be used across a variety of sectors, even relative to ICT. So it seems to be even more general purpose than ICT itself, right? And here is another way to present the same idea, which is through this idea of generality score. How many domains are essentially using it? The share of domains that actually use AI technologies. It seems like AI is much better even than ICT in its formative years, right? And that in turn, these two in turn are much higher than those in other domains as well. So what could be the conclusion? The first hypothesis, I'm just going to conclude on the first hypothesis. They seem to be representing greater value, greater ability to spur downstream innovations. Their applications, they tend to be applied in a broader array of domains. It tends to be more original, right? And foundational models, and this is important, and I'll come back and talk about why this is also important. The foundational models seem to have come more so from the industry than from the university, which is the case with Dynamo and ICT. The big innovations, the big breakthroughs essentially came from universities. That's not the case with AI. It's an industry-led GPT in a lot of ways, right? So let me now examine the second hypothesis. Maybe the commercial applications are not generated as fast as we might want, or in the quantity and the scale at which we might want. So first, if you simply step back and look at, are companies essentially using AI? One crude way of looking or examining that idea is simply to look at AI users and what proportion of their patents use AI. And that tends to be around 30%. That also tends to be around 30%. And in fact, ICT was just about higher in its formative years. You have two axes over here. ICT was just about higher, but it's catching up. If you look at the last few years, it seems to be catching up, okay? What about funding of startups that create these applications? Right here is a broad sense of the funding data. It goes from 2001 to 20, and the long and short is as follows. There was a decline after 2007, 2006, but then it seems to have picked up. There was this decline, and then it picked up, right? And here is the total funding, right? So on the left-hand side of your picture, you see the funding per startup. There are X number of startups in the sector. There are Y billion dollars. You can calculate the average funding per startup. The average funding per startup declined after 2005. It seems to be picking up around 2018 or so. But if you look at the aggregate amount of money that VCs are spending, VCs, private equity, in equity funding of these startups, they have increased, right? So there's this exponential increase that you see on the right-hand side of your picture. And if you simply look at the likelihood of getting funded, so you are an AI startup, How do I assess the likelihood of getting funded relative to those in other sectors, ICT and other sectors, which are non-ICT and non-AI? It seems like the highest likelihood of being funded. If you wanted to do a startup, here is your choice. You can either do an AI startup, you can do an ICT startup, you can do it in any other sector. But if you want to get funded, you better do an AI startup. That's the way to think about it. Okay? And if you look at the number of unicorns, they've spiked up since 2020. And if you look at the successful and unsuccessful exit, let me explain what these are. A successful exit is like you're an entrepreneur, you cash out substantially more than the money that you've raised and the money that you have invested itself. What's an unsuccessful exit? You don't do that. You've lost your shirt running the startup. And if you look at both the successful and unsuccessful exits, they seem to be tailing up. So I've drawn the circles around it. They seem to be tailing up towards after 2020. So this is what is also happening. So I just want you to keep these at the back of your mind, and I'll come back and generalize. So here is however, a different side of the story. So I don't know what you've concluded until now, but if you look at adoption, there's been substantial adoption. I already showed you that. But over the last year, the adoption rates have declined, especially in sectors that you would imagine were at the forefront of AI adoption. What were they? Media and telecom. People who consume Netflix, it should ring a bell that media and telecom were at the forefront of AI adoption. Financial sector that uses a lot of AI, they have also seen huge declines, for example, right? So you see the big ones like minus 27% coming from retail as well. Another industry that was at the forefront of using AI, right? So maybe there's changing tide. Is that what is happening? Because if you look at, so I tactically presented data until 2020 simply to hide what is actually happening over the last 2 or 3 years. What is happening over the last 2 or 3 years? Changing tide. Look at the amount of private investments. 22, 23. From 21, there's been a decline. Okay? And if you look at corporate investments by company in R&D, in AI, that's also tailing down during the same period. And forget about everything, right? Who cares about investments? Let's look at jobs. The number of AI jobs, the increase, it has also tailed down over the last 2 years, right? Across the world, right? And here are a few speculations for you. Sure, there's been great progress that's been made over the last few years, but maybe all the low-hanging fruits have been picked, the low-hanging cherries have been picked off, and it's quite plausible that we are already hitting diminishing returns, right? Which is what is generating these trends, right? It's quite plausible that AI is now hitting the diminishing returns phase, right? The second one is economic downturn. Right? There's been slowdown in different parts of the world, but this seems like unlikely because what I've not presented to you is the breakdown by countries. If you look at China, which has been going through slowdown over the last few years, the amount of AI investments has actually tailed up, not down. Right? So that seems a bit unlikely as well. The third one, which is quite plausible, is lack of returns from complementary innovations. The firms are experimenting, companies are experimenting, entities are experimenting, but maybe they are not seeing enough returns. And hence, they are scaling back in developing these complementary innovations. As a result of which, startups are not seeing businesses. And hence, the VCs are not investing in startups. Maybe that's the other one. And this might be plausible, especially given the data that I presented on media, retail, and finance sectors scaling back on their AI investments. Right? The last one is impatience. Right? Remember, I spoke about the idea that this might be an industry-generated general-purpose technology. One of the implications of that is that maybe the industry is not as patient as the universities. It might also mean that the scale back might be a little bit premature, relative to the other general purpose technologies which were essentially university-led, right? And of course, the last 2 points might be related. And this is simply what I wanted the panel to throw some light on. I just gave you some pointers so that the panel can put some of these ideas in perspective. Yeah? So what are the implications of this? And we'll, which is the reason why I think the panel discussion is incredibly important. The burst there could be this hype, and this so-called burst of hype and pessimism is not because AI is not a general purpose technology in a purely technical sense, but it could well be that the creation of complementary technologies to extract maximum value from AI has actually declined. You know what? That just may not be something that you might worry as industry captains. You might actually worry simply if you were not an industry captain, simply because it has an impact on whether AI can become a general purpose technology. Our living standards, in other words, right? So that is what is in stake, especially with the conversation with the panel. And that's what I would like to focus on. Yeah? Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is, of course, to turn to the panel, and I have my notes given the importance of the topic. What I'd like to start off, maybe I'll start off with Trishna, and I would like an opening statement, right? So the opening statement could be a quick one, and you could take about 2 minutes to do that. And if you could say that, look, is AI something of value for a broad array of industries? In other words, is it the general purpose technology, like I said, or is it simply a fad, and you could, use whatever examples that you've seen and encountered to be able to make that opening statement?
Sounds good. Sure. So before I make a point either way, right, I want to call out that I'm looking at AI as the field that's been around for several decades now, not the recent Gen AI spurt that we've seen, the spurt of interest that we've seen. So if I think about AI and, kind of bringing it also into perspective, like your spam filter is powered by AI, your YouTube recommendations are powered by AI, and they've been powered by AI of some shape or form for many, many years now, right? So AI by itself is not new. What is new today, in my view, and what's kind of driving this in high level of interest in AI is, one, the fact that it has become much, much more accessible than it used to be earlier. Two is that the data that it's being trained on, right, is far vast and of much higher quality than what was available earlier. And three is that, of course, there's, all of this data training and so on needs a lot more computational power, which is now available, thanks to us having that computational power available, right? So I think I want to establish AI is not new, okay? So when I'm talking about, hey, is AI going to make a difference, or does AI have the potential to be a GPT? I'm going to use the entire gamut of AI tools and technologies that are available to us, and not just the recent ones, which is driven by, say, the OpenAI or the Copilots or the Geminis of the world, where you have an interface which makes it more accessible, which makes it easier for people to look at and get access, and maybe put in an Excel sheet, get a diagram out, and so on. So with keeping that in mind, I would say yes, AI is for sure a general purpose technology, right? We have seen the impact of AI across many, many sectors, and you yourself, sir, kind of pointed that out. Yes, there's been a waning and a waxing impact in some areas, but there has been impact. What I feel this ease of access does today, earlier this access was limited maybe to academia, maybe to larger companies which had the wherewithal to build the resources for this kind of computational power requirement and data requirements. I think this ease of access, where you have a conversational surface which you can use, kind of opens up a plethora of smaller use cases which earlier were either not built for, were ignored, were probably not of high value enough for someone to build a solution for. And that's what will kind of, I anticipate that's what will happen as we move deeper into this AI phase, right? But my opening statement, I would say we've seen impact across health. We've seen, we got a Nobel Prize very recently because AI was able to predict a protein structure accurately, right? So we've seen in health, we've seen in operations, we've seen in multiple areas. You are seeing some of the lower hanging fruits around creativity, around content generation, around marketing, etc., kind of getting harnessed down now that AI is more accessible. And I anticipate this, getting deeper and deeper embedded as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Prithvijit, your opening statements.
Thank you, and fascinating research again. And as you were talking through it, I was also thinking through it. I think a lot of ground Trishna covered, but just to build on it, I was trying to compare my learnings because I've been in this space working on for the last 2.5 decades, and to a certain extent, the buildup is very interesting. How AI built up. When I started, it was not so much AI. It was not called AI. It was called more predictive analytics and more really draw insights, which is also the name of this forum, from data. So that's how it all started off, kind of a thing. But then quickly with technology advancement, the second phase called big data came in, because you could start thinking of things. The data doesn't have to be structured data. It could be unstructured data and other coming in. And then probably AI came in, and I would probably call that phase more as a part of ICT, because it was just building up kind of a thing. But it phased out probably into a new technology called AI at the third phase, where AI did not stop at insights from data, but it could drive actions. So you could train machines to drive actions, and it could start doing things because it could train them. So that's the third phase. And which is called AI, machine learning, and others. The fourth phase is probably last 1.5 to 2 years, to your point, which is generative AI. I think to a certain extent it's a build-up of what has been happening in classical AI, but it does two things. I think Trishna covered it. One is it has consumerized AI. It has brought it to homes. Today everyone's using it. The interface with using AI has become very easy. Earlier it was a very difficult thing for users to use AI. So that's one. And second, obviously it brings in a lot more unstructured information and others into the foray. So that's the fourth kind of phase, and which makes it the third and fourth phase is really panning out of ICT into probably a new general purpose technology. Again, having said that, in my view, tomorrow we're still scratching the surface. It's not that we have learned everything. It will probably evolve. It's going to be embedded into a lot more newer things, standalone. We'll see how it and there are elements of we have to think about it responsibly also, how AI is used. AI is again a technology which will augment us as humans to do things which you could not do earlier. So in my view, it is general purpose technology, but it's going to take time to be actually embedded in almost everything we do, is my opening statement again.
Himanshu?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here, Anand, and fascinating research. I'm going to speak as someone who is trying to actually use AI and build it into a product. I also, in addition to teaching, run an early stage company which is in the operations optimization space. And what I feel is that just like ICT has become today a part of, I would call it digital infrastructure. Earlier, you would go onto the internet to search or to send emails, but today, internet is the way you work, quite literally, right? In everything you do. I feel like AI has that potential, but it is not there yet. So if you ask me, is it a GPT? It has the potential to be a GPT. Will it actually make it there? It depends a lot on the trajectory it takes, i.e. in terms of the speed, as well as most importantly, the people who invest in it. I feel very strongly about this, that I think for AI to truly diffuse the way electricity diffused or more recently ICT diffused. If you think about it, electricity only took off when fossil fuel mining was able to be done economically at scale. That's when actually electrification took off. So we are probably waiting for some of those other things in AI to fall in place, in my view. Some of those other, and you touched on it, you actually talked about complementary. Computing power has become cheaper, Machines have become smarter. Data, a lot more data is available. But is it the right data? Is it clean data? Is it available at the point of need? I think we are a far ways from that. So one of the things that has not come together is the availability of the right data at the right time, at the right place, to the right person, at the right cost. And I think unless that happens, I don't know whether this will actually truly become a GPT, which it has the potential to. So that's one. The second, I think, is, and I'll stop here because this is an opening statement, is, and I'm happy to tease this out later, is this whole promise of predictive analytics. You have to be very careful with it. It can predict, but is that prediction necessarily a good decision? I think there is a ways to that, right? Because predictive analytics makes several assumptions. It makes an assumption that everybody who shares the same characteristics behave the same. No, they don't. That's factual.
So I'm going to take
a lot of those things.
I'm going to take the privilege of interrupting you.
Yes.
So what is the context of prediction, the importance of prediction in AI becoming a GPT? So I'm just curious.
So, I mean, look, when it comes to predicting physical phenomena, I think AI can do a good job because the rules are known. What is AI? At the end of the day, it's algorithms, which are rule-based.
Learning and doing.
Learning, and then there are models which learn and all blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to social phenomena, and we deal with a lot of that in business schools, as well as you guys deal with it as managers. I mean, take a couple of examples, right? For example, people have tried to use AI to predict who should get parole or not from jail. And basically they're trying to predict whether the guy will actually show up in court or whether he'll perform, sorry, not guy, the person, need to be careful, will show up in court or will commit another crime. And they've built a model where they've taken things like, predisposition to crime, other family members who have committed crime, how often is this guy bored, I mean, things like that. But is that prediction accurate? And you're dealing with lives here, right? You're not talking about the next Netflix movie to watch. That's okay. But you're talking about lives. You're talking about whom to release from a hospital bed or not. I don't know whether AI's predictive capability has reached there yet. And yet, the promises that are being made is, oh, we've got it done. And it's private capital that is doing it. And your point about China investing when no one else is investing, the government is investing, for God's sake. There's patient capital over there. In other places, the capital is commercial capital, which is impatient capital, which is trying to sell you a thing.
Wonderful. So I'm going to take up on the first offer that you made, which is to peel the layers of the onion. So I peeled it in a particular way, but you added one more layer to the onion, which I think is physically impossible. But nonetheless, you did it. The two things that you mentioned, I spoke about commercializing, right? The commercial innovations or the complementary innovations that needs to happen. You brought in data to the mix as well. So let's try and break them as data and complementary innovations, right? What about data? How has the data infrastructure evolved over time? Has it kept pace with the rate of evolution of the technical side of AI itself? What about data? What needs to be improved? So you could combine all of that and maybe talk from your experience as well.
Yeah, so I think, so there are two ways to break this down, right? One is, has the infrastructure evolved? So is it possible to process that data, at the speed that you want to access it and so on? The other is, do we have the right kind and the right quality and the right quantity of data, right? Like these are the two broad problems that kind of are there. I think the first one, we've made progress, and I have belief that we will make tremendous progress, just like we have from the semiconductor time to now, where computation power has generally increased over time, right? Of course, there is this whole question of Is it environmentally sustainable, and so on, which needs to be addressed separately. I think the second one, I agree with what Himanshu said, that is a challenge, right? And that, in my view, is going to be the biggest adoption challenge that will come for industries, right? The data that today's publicly available GPTs are trained on is what's available on the internet. You have a lot of these famous gaffes by Gemini saying, oh, put glue on your pizza, and so on and so forth, depending on what was the data set that they were trained on, right? And that is going to be the key distinguishing factor. Now, while yes, that's all in jest, and you can still say, hey, there's a star mark saying AI is still exploratory and it can still make mistakes. The asterisk is always there for a lot of these publicly facing products, at least right now. But if you think about it from a commercialization perspective, finding the right data, the right quantity of data to be able to train your AI. Imagine you're building a chatbot for your banking website, right? You want to be able to train that such that it is able to respond to most of your frontline questions well. Having that data set in the right format is going to be a big challenge. So I know we are going to cover this in the second part, and that was going to be one of my key points, that, hey, when you're saying adoption, right, what's going to harm or what's going to delay adoption, I feel data sanctity is definitely going to be one of those areas that will need focused attention when you are saying large-scale adoption of AI technologies, which are meaningful for the end user, meaningful for businesses.
So two things that she touched on: data sanctity, data infrastructure. So she is hopeful about the infrastructure, not as hopeful about sanctity. What do you think, Prithvijit?
Yeah, so from sanctity, if I break it up, I would say there is one which is types of data and availability. I think we have made huge progress over the last decade or so on availability of data. Today, the definition of data is completely changed. Earlier, data for us was rows and columns. We would use it that way. But today, the picture getting clicked there is data. Any voice is data. Again, any video is data. Think about, now, if I tie that availability to application, to your point, think about driverless cars. Is it an AI application? It is absolutely an AI application. And think about to your killer app concept, because it takes data to the next level on everything from sensors that's coming in. How do I use it to actually make that car driverless? Think about Amazon Go. The whole concept is go into the shop and watch out without getting into the billing thing at all. You're picking up things, again, cameras are capturing it. It is processing it to actually tell you what's your total cost, so that's the new definition of data. Now, with that availability, now question is quality, which is the second part. Quality is always going to be an evolving factor. It's not going to be overnight happening. It is going to be over time. Today, again, data, to your point, external data versus an enterprise internal data, the quality of the internal data is much higher as compared to external data out there, because no one's looking into internal, is kind of looked at better. There's also an element of cost of good data, and I think we need to think about it, and that's where algorithms of AI comes into play also, because today what we are trying to do with GPTs, or in that scenario, it's more Gen AI. I don't want to confuse the term GPT here. It's actually a very costly process to actually train these models, do it, and you can't just do it by Gen AI. The algorithm has to talk to classical AI, which is actually much more less costlier thing. But we are not thinking. We are actually saying we are putting Gen AI into everything. So I think it's really an evolution of how data will evolve over time. But it has evolved already a lot compared to things. But technology is evolving. Cost will also go down. There are impacts on sustainability, others, which you have to think of on data also.
So can I summarize that by saying that you're also hopeful about the infrastructure, but data is also changing. So There is that interplay between infrastructure and the nature of data evolving itself. And you're not as hopeful like Trishna was about the sanctity.
Sanctity is going to evolve over time also. Yeah.
What do you think?
I would go with that, but I think I would add another reason for it. The issues around sanctity of data are more human than technology. Wherever we have tried to get data, it's not that data is not available. Everyone's hoarding data. Sharing of data is not that easy, right? Because now probably somewhere at the back of the mind, this data has become power. Knowledge is no longer power. It's data which is power. People want to hold on to data, don't want to share it openly. And unfortunately, for the complex problems that AI tries to solve, you need data from multiple functions.
Could you,
not just from one area.
Help us with an example of that?
So, just given my background in public sector consulting, at one time we were trying to build a model to solve for domestic abuse at a sort of a national government level. And we built a model, a physical model first, and we realized we need data from at least 4 ministries, and within the 4 ministries, 3 departments in each ministry or something like that. So we had to go across defense, home, family and social welfare, narcotics, at least 5 or 6 agencies. We simply couldn't get these people together on one platform to agree that we need to share this data and create a common data lake, as simple as that. So it was a non-starter. We did not even begin to build the model because we had no data to train it, blah, blah, blah. So that's one example. More close to home in the work that I do every day, I go to organizations and we do operations optimization. So we try to create a digital twin of a process. So we ask for process maps. We ask for workforce information, we work for IT information, we ask for finance information, and we ask for risks and controls information. All this lies in 4 or 5 different parts of the organization. Sometimes within the same department, it lies in 3 sections. We can't get this data together. So now we have resorted to doing what Prithvijit is saying, use AI to predict the data. So now we predict your average handling time, we predict your forms and rules, and say, okay, now you validate it. You don't want to give it? Fine, we have predicted it for you, now you validate and tell me yes or no.
We, as academics, we might have to retract our papers if we try to do that. Is that even
You have the advantage of validation, right? So they're validating.
Okay.
So, but examples like that. So I think the sanctity of data question, that it's not that data is not available. Sometimes it is about just physically the getting over the organizational barrier. So I think organizational forms need to change to accommodate for this.
So, in summary, it seems like there are, data infrastructure, probably a thumbs up. We are used to that, given the social media world that we live in. So, data infrastructure, thumbs up. Cost, it's unclear because there are new forms of data that's emerging. You spoke about incentives. So, data collection is as much a managerial problem as much as it's something else. And data sanctity, a thumbs down, clearly, right? Not there yet, and a lot of work needs to be done. So let's switch gears. I want to maybe ask you, Prithvijit, given your bird's eye view of several industries, what's happening on the complementary innovation front? What are firms doing? What are the typical use cases of AI? So the technology per se seems like it's evolving at a rapid pace. So how are companies extracting value from AI? Are they doing it well enough, in your opinion? Or is there something that might be lacking there? What do you think?
So and you talked about 2 characteristics, one of GPT, one being industry applications and complementary kind of innovation. I think there's a lot of progress happening on both compared to what I have seen, again, 2 decades back when I came in. I think probably it was only a few industries like financial services or retail just doing it. Today, I think the application of AI is multi-industry, multi-function. It is. I think you're every day you're looking at new use cases there. And for complementarity, I think this whole space is an ecosystem building up. And like Himanshu's point on data is true, but there is a complementary thinking on technology again coming in on how to address it. Like this whole, you can't create a lake anymore, but today concepts of graph databases are trying to address on really organizing data differently in the whole thinking. But obviously there are guidelines, privacy rules and others which you have to honor. But I think there are a lot of thinking on application. I'll give an example again, which we had been working on recently. We have talked about business intelligence or reporting in enterprises in long time. This is a space everyone just keeps on generating reports, and business managers look into it. Today with AI, that whole space is changing drastically, and we call it AI for BI. Because today, because of AI, you don't need managers to read reports because they're reading and finding what is an exception. Machines can read it. So you can train machines to read the report and tell managers, now look into it, looks like the trend has broken. There is something which is an anomaly. And managers can then go and then start thinking, what should I be doing here? So, and then it can, by the way, interact with GenAI. It can interact a lot more easily. So from it's not exactly AI, but it's a complemental space how BI is just shifting because of AI. Again, I'll give another example of application plus complementary. Sales as a space. Again, just today, sales, but the space has been generally a space where it's very difficult to use technology because there's a lot of, again, tacit knowledge in sales, people who don't put it into systems and it gets lost in the thing. But today, again, you can use AI to talk to the salesperson and say, I'm your assistant. I will help you to be more productive. I'll tell you which route to go. I will tell you. So you are actually now taking the fear factor out, and the sales space is evolving big time because of, again, AI and Gen AI. So I'm just giving examples. So it's slowly getting infused into spaces which is not AI. It is actually applications and complementary space. Tomorrow when ERPs in sales will develop, it will actually have a lot more embedded AI is what's heading towards. So that's really my thinking. But again, it's scratching the surface.
So
and there are inhibitors to make that happen. We can talk about it, but the space is evolving.
So in a way, you're saying you use AI to solve AI's challenges.
Absolutely. I think it's a lot
Very
more.
interesting.
I think data quality as a space. I think data quality is changing because of AI then.
So I also wanted to table something, right? So for some of us here, we are also at the same time thinking about whether it's going to take my job. I always wake up at 4 a.m. at night saying that, okay, is my job as a professor going to be done by a machine? We'll come back and revisit that. So maybe that's also another reason why we may not see it in the productivity data. As much as the productivity increases that it could generate, there is equal amount of displacement that could happen as well. So maybe we can come back and talk about it. But Trishna, I wanted to ask you about your experience in healthcare. So is there, what's the pace of these complementary innovations that are happening in your space, the space that you're familiar with? Is that enough? Is it keeping pace with the rate at which the technology per se is evolving?
I would say healthcare is one of those areas where AI has always had a role to play, right? So it's not new, be it with respect to, advanced detection. So I know Himanshu spoke about a case where predictive analysis in a social setting, but I feel predictive analysis in a healthcare setting for prevention is hugely valuable,
Absolutely.
right? So, I mean, that's always, that has been around for a while in many different ways, breast cancer prediction, prostate cancer prediction, and so on. And I know, retinal health and so on, right? What has changed recently, I think, on both the consumer side as well as on the practitioner side, I think using AI innovatively to really automate those repetitive tasks for practitioners, right? Imagine, I don't think we see it as much in India, but in developed countries, there's a lot of admin work that the practitioner ends up doing. So similar to what, he mentioned, that an assistant for sales, what an assistant for, the practitioner who records everything, makes the right kind of notes. The practitioner is able to give, human feedback, which then evolves the notes, which, automatically gets pumped into the database and so on. And I think that is hugely, hugely valuable. So I think a lot of operational efficiencies which are under the hood, not really visible to the end user, on the practitioner side that I feel AI is driving right now. Nuance is a company in the Microsoft umbrella which is kind of doing a lot of this work on the practitioner side. I think on the user side, there's a huge element of personalized healthcare, right? Be it personalized diet plans, be it personalized fitness plans, personalized treatments, which is coming in, which again we are scratching the surface of. I don't think AI is yet quite there that it's brilliantly, it's working brilliantly, but it's definitely doing much more than, hey, here is a fitness program which is a generalized fitness program, doesn't take into account that you have knobbly knees or so on and so forth, right? So I think that is the space that is definitely seeing evolution, and where complementary I think companies are building on top of the AI layer to be able to use the data that comes in from the users differently. Like your fast track is going to go give a data feed into that, right? And all of that is on top of that. They're building the layer that will give you personalized input and give you those personalized healthcare plans which work for you and work with you, right? So I think those are the two broad areas where I think that we are seeing that impact coming.
Thank you. So I can also see some of the practitioners getting worried. So, and I reserved a curveball for you, Himanshu, given that I know you very well. And here's the curveball. So it seems like there could be displacement with some of these advances. So it seems like one of the things that we are discovering from this conversation is simply this idea, sure, there could be these complementary innovations, but you may not still see it in the productivity data, because for every complementary innovation, there could be equal displacement, right? That sounds very Newtonian, but nonetheless, how are companies, so is this idea of displacement really big? That's the first question. And second one is, if there is displacement, given your HR expertise, how are companies dealing with it? Or how should, maybe you can even be normative and say, how should companies deal with it? What do you think?
So I think a lot of this is work in progress. I mean, there are individual anecdotal data points, right? Some companies have claimed that they saved as many as 10,000 jobs in a year, but did not get rid of anybody. Instead, simply use that to do more business, to increase the size of the pie. So there are anecdotal evidences like that coming from different places. But I think there is no getting away from the fact that actually, in my view, AI, and the more advanced we make with the non-structured data, like generative AI, and as we go in that journey, in a strange sort of a way, this is going to reset the inequality in society. I feel.
So you're not talking about company. You're not talking
no,
about.
I'm talking about society first.
You're talking about society.
Society first, okay. And then we'll come down to company. Okay. So there was some data that I was given as a part of a research program that I'm involved in Singapore, where they looked at the composition of the middle class. Middle class is defined as people who earn anything from 0.8 to 1.2 of the national average, whatever the compensation. And they simply delved into it to look at the demographics of that sector. And over the years, they're finding there is a shift, and this middle class, more and more now, has postgraduates in it. Now, the only way to interpret that data is there is a downward pressure, which technologies like AI and Gen AI are creating, on the highly skilled knowledge workers. And their wages are being pushed down, and they're moving into middle class. Meanwhile, there is an upward pressure as well, because the robotic process automations of the world and all that have anyway displaced the more routine transactional workforce. So in some sense, the inequality that existed where people earned 12 times just because he was an investment banker or something like that absolutely didn't deserve it. Sorry, I'm making a controversial statement.
That sounds like a really bad. That sounds like a really bad equilibrium. No?
Yeah, so it's bringing workforces more closer to each other in that sense. So that inequality. So there is. I don't know whether there will be mass scale layoffs and that kind of stuff, but certainly there is going to be a pressure on compensation structures. And what people and how people get compensated, because what was highly skilled is no longer so highly skilled.
So I want to make sure that there is enough
and they
time.
need fewer people to do that.
I like the way you called it as democratic, and then you essentially opened the dark web once you started to dwell deeper. Dwell, right, which is meant to be a Gen AI word now. So I just want to make sure that there's enough time for questions. So why don't we just go around and get your closing statements? In net, where would you leave AI? Is it a GPT that would likely affect our standards of living in the future? Or do you think it will bottom out at some point, given some of these issues around data and maybe the upward and the downward pressure, the democratization? Yeah.
So I still feel that it is a GPT, but of course we will have to implement it responsibly, and regulatory frameworks will have to evolve and keep pace such that it is truly used as a GPT, right? So I think in the earlier examples that you shared, where you said dynamo and electricity and so on, I think by their nature itself, because it was so useful, it diffused in the right way. I think here we'll have to make an effort to make sure that it gets diffused in the right way, right? So I'm hoping that the regulatory framework and companies doing it responsibly actually keeps pace with the technology diffusion. I don't have any doubts about the technology diffusion. I think in some shape or form that's happening even as we speak, right? And it's probably not as visible to us. What's visible is only on the surface, not deeper down, but that's happening as it is, and I don't think there's, that's going to stop. So I think that's my closing statement, that yes, it is a GPT. It has a potential to be a GPT as long as we do it responsibly.
Okay. So let's work on the regulatory framework and be a bit more patient. So Prithvijit,
few pointers just based on the discussion. Today's state, most enterprises are still doing pilots of AI rather than in production. So there are hindrances. In fact, I say in a lot of conferences, companies have more pilots than Air India. Is the reality of today's scenario. AI pilots, I mean. So, but to that extent, I think some of the hindrances also because of responsible thinking process, but also the fear factor of AI. I actually believe it is not about replacing humans. There's a much bigger play of augmenting humans, which, yes, repetitive certain jobs will go, but there are a lot more jobs which are going to be created because of AI application. So that's the second thing. And just a third point to kind of say, I think any new technology in the short run, especially with Gen AI, has more hype than the value it realizes. But over a long term, the value will surpass the hype, because the hype is eating a lot. To your last 2 years' point, I think the Gen AI hype is more than what it can deliver right now. But there is a bigger play which will come in the long term.
Okay. Manshi, your
No,
closing thoughts?
I reinforce what both of them said. It has potential to be a GPT. For it to become truly a GPT, a few other factors need to come in place. Data, the human receptivity, all the adoption issues that he talked about, the regulatory structures. But I think this, if I were to call out one thing, it would be that I hope that more patient capital gets invested in this area, because the results are not so soon. There are few and far in between Microsofts who will put in that kind of money without expecting in return tomorrow morning. And do the right use cases. If you have many more of these, if governments put in money, if governments and responsible companies get together and invest, then I think it will accelerate this process.